just I remember lying in bed and I couldn't look at screens. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't do anything. I remember just laying in bed feeling like I had weights on my limbs, to get up just felt like a big struggle. There was one doctor that basically said to me, I have no idea what's going on.
So if you eat an apple and go 80 calories over, Karen, you're not going to die. You're fine. It's okay.
And doctors just kept telling me, it's IBS, it's IBS. There's I believe that IBS is complete BS. It's not a diagnosis.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Katie with us. Katie, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I am a certified holistic health coach and I specialise in gut health, anxiety and burnout. Basically because that was my own personal background, very long story short, which I'm sure we'll get into the long in a minute. But yeah, I was chronically ill for 10 years and I was this medical mystery to a ton of doctors and specialists, and in the end I decided to take my health into my own hands and got better myself, and then just wanted to help other people do the same. So yeah, that's me at the moment.
I love this because this is something really close to my heart. As I was saying to Katie, those that know Gina struggled a lot with managing her gut health and everything going on. So I'm really excited about this because I think everyone's going to learn something, me included. So yeah. Really looking forward to this. Just really quickly, tell us how obviously you briefly touched on it there, what led you to where you are today? Because one thing that I found really interesting doing some research to you and working with one of your close friends is you went from working in the corporate world to in London to, I'm going to go move to Bali. That's quite a big jump.
Yes, especially for me. I was very much a planner, a warrior. I was on a career path. So taking it back to the beginning. After university, I'd say, is when I started to get my gut issues. So now looking back on things, it's really easy to see the tells and see the clues. But when you're in it, it's much harder. You don't really have that perspective. But anyway, so I finished university, eventually after lots of internships went into PR and events in London. So very fast paced, a lot of pressure, a lot of hours. And I honestly didn't even really connect the two at the time. But I started to get some gut issues, lower grade. Over the first couple of years, I was seeing doctors eventually because I was trying to manage it by myself at first. And I just thought it was certain foods that I ate. I cut out a little bit of gluten. I feel a bit better. Did the same with dairy, alcohol, sugar, things like that. But it just kept getting worse. And doctors just kept telling me it's IBS, it's IBS. At the time, I believed that IBS was a real thing. Now, to anyone that follows me and obviously to your new followers, I believe that IBS is complete BS. It's not a diagnosis in itself. It's a syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, which basically means a similar collection of symptoms, which basically means the doctor has no idea what's wrong with you. And they probably just don't have the time to dig in and find out, especially in the UK with the NHS just being inundated as it is. So yeah, I had that label to begin with. Things were a bit bumpy up and down. And then towards my late 20s, things just got really bad. My hair was coming out. I had random rashes. It wasn't just bloating. It was I looked pregnant. It was distension, 6-month bloat, no matter what I ate. I tried every diet under the sun. And I'm sure we'll come on to touch on burnout properly as well. But I couldn't walk down the road without my legs buckling. I remember one weekend asking my mum to come and stay with me for the weekend because I couldn't brush my hair. I was going to brush my hair and my hairbrush was falling out of my hand. So I was terrified by that point because I was what is happening? My body just seemed to be breaking down. Nobody had any answers for me. I was spending thousands of pounds. I'd gone beyond the NHS by this point, speaking to all specialists. They were supposedly tried every test on me. All my blood tests were coming back normal. So it just started to get in my head a little bit. Obviously, I was very stressed and getting anxious about what was going on with me anyway. And then to kind of have these people you're supposed to look up to who know everything, or so I thought, tell you that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, or on paper there's nothing wrong with you, it starts to make you feel a little bit crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually sat here just amazed. As I say, a lot of what you're describing is a lot of what Gina, those who follow NQPC know Gina really well, what she goes through. And not to that extent, like she's not got to the point where with the hairbrush scenario and the struggle to walk, but there's a lot of similarities, and like similar to what you said, it's commonly thought that, it's something to do with maybe there's an allergy to gluten.
Yes.
Like there's definitely trigger foods for her. We've
100%.
figured that out, but there's no, this system works. This is perfect. If we stay on this system, you'll be fine. Exactly. We haven't found that yet.
No, and that's what's so maddening, because that's what I was finding as well. I was like, okay, like I'm feeling a little bit better if I don't have gluten. Awesome, gluten-free diet. And then I'd have a week of like gluten-free diet, like being awesome, doing all the things, like trying so hard as well, which is a definite, I think that was a bit of a trigger as well, I found, by doing too much. And that definitely was my personality type looking back, and still like a work in progress of that. I was just a huge, so I was like a go-getter. So that's where my name Glow-Getter has kind of come from. And I was very much like type A, perfectionist, never wanted to upset anybody, didn't really like saying no. So I'd say yes to all the hours. And if my colleagues or people working below me were struggling, like I'd help them out. And yeah, looking back on it, I can kind of see where I maybe got myself to where I did. But at the time I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mad. And we were going to touch on as well, but you mentioned earlier, burnout, that plays a massive part. I think people underestimate how much anxiety, stress and burnout all link to how you're feeling, how your gut's feeling, how your mental health is feeling. Like I remember I went through a stage of really struggling with my mental health, and I've mentioned it before, went on an apprenticeship where they essentially wanted a marketing manager, but couldn't afford one, so hired me. And then I was asked to fill out procurement documents that were worth a lot of money to the business. Understandably so, 18-year-old Charlie freaked the hell out and really found that really difficult. Yeah. And then obviously that then leads to, my stomach doesn't feel great. You get the panic comes in as well. It all links together. So what's been your journey with burnout? You briefly touched on it there, obviously, with working in London, fast pace, having to help the people below you because you're not wanting them to struggle, but then also wanting to keep up with yourself. I think it's an endless spiral.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so there was one doctor that basically said to me, she was like, look, Katie, like, I have no idea what's going on. I'm sorry, but I do know that it is probably stress related. And I think you need to change your career and you need to change your lifestyle. Because at the time it ends up being something that's really cyclical, in that the more that you get symptoms, obviously the more stress that you get, the more stressed that you get, the more symptoms that you get, the more that you have symptoms that are stressing you out at work because you're worrying about kind of letting people down at work. And then I just wasn't sleeping and that just wasn't helping things. But yeah, I would say probably the first sign of me having burnout, because I've now kind of trailed it back, was I was working for a big PR agency in London at the time, and we were working on a huge global event with celebrities involved, media, and it was in Ibiza. And there was like a 6-month lead up to this event of where we were all working very hard. We were in the office at 7, we were there until midnight. It was almost as if we were supposed to feel grateful because they got takeaway dinner for us, and we were working weekends. Yeah. And I just did not have a social life. I remember getting really stressed because I kept having to cancel plans on my friends and I felt really bad. And then in the end, I was just like, I just can't make plans. Anyway, that was kind of the lead up to Ibiza. we got to Ibiza, and obviously the huge team of us was so tired because we just hadn't had a break before. And we knew we then kind of had a couple of days prep to kind of put the event together out there. There was huge other teams that we were working with, this whole big production, millions and millions of pounds. So it was a lot of pressure for it to go right as well. And then we had a 3-day immersive event with like this big name. And I remember landing, getting to the hotel, and I felt so bizarre. I'd never felt like that before. I was like, I'm either going to faint, I'm going to pass out. Like, I didn't really feel like I could stand. I had all these like high level executives around me. And I just remember thinking at the time, like, I wasn't worried for my health. I was like, I do not have time for this. I cannot be sick. I cannot let these people down. And I was just seeing my colleagues around me just pounding coffee, and I'd never touched coffee. I'd never had it before. And I was like, I think I'm just going to have to try it, see if it works. And that was when I became a coffee drinker. I know where this is going.
Yeah.
And that's what got me through that event. And looking back on it, like, I can't believe, like, with my health coach hat on, I'm like, oh my goodness, Katie, I cannot believe that you did that. But at the time, it was almost like survival. And obviously all your friends are just seeing the end event of this like glamorous, glitzy event. They don't see everything that goes into it. And I remember, so I got back to the UK and just felt so ill. It was like my body was just like, no, can't handle anymore. I went to the doctors and they were like, you are exhausted. We're signing you off from work. So I got signed off from work by that point for a week, I think, and I went in and I quit the week after.
Wow.
So yeah, I was kind of, I think I that was the point where I kind of started to take my health and the effects of it a bit more seriously. And also I wasn't even enjoying what I was doing at the time, and I was kind of weighing it up. I was like, is it really worth me physically being exhausted? And at the time it wasn't. So I kind of transitioned then, and I went into freelance PR so I could control my hours much more, or at least if I was working overtime, I was getting paid for it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that also, how did you deal with the whole, because I'm obviously doing a lot of side work, which I do.
Yes.
I often have that thing of like, oh, do we just jump and go, do you know what? Let's leave the job and figure it out. And that's often the picture that people create when they create successful businesses. Yeah. So what was your journey of going into that room and being like, obviously yours was slightly different for the reasoning, but going into that room and be like, you know what? Sod this. I'm going to see what else is out there. How did you marry that up in your head? And I'm asking that as a very like personal question as well.
No. Makes complete sense, because I was like as a kid, like, I was always like a worrier. Like, I don't think the word like anxiety really existed. And I don't know whether I was necessarily anxious as a kid. I was very aware. I was always told I was very grown up, very mature, very well behaved. And obviously now that completely feeds into the people pleasing, the lack of boundaries, which actually then affected my health. But you're praised for it when you're younger. So you just continue doing it because you think it's a good thing. But yeah, it was definitely kind of an overthinker, worrier, and that's still to this day something I now have things that I work on daily with, so it doesn't affect me anywhere near as much. But yeah, that would have been a huge decision. And actually looking back on it, I think because it was almost as if I wasn't like 100% consciously there. I think because I just felt so ill, I was just like, I can't do this. And I think I had all my friends and family as well, like, Katie, you cannot do this. And I was luckier because I'd been in PR for a good few years by that point. And people in PR tend to jump around quite a lot, which is no surprise. So I had contacts who I kind of knew that would be able to give me some freelance work. So it wasn't a huge leap into the unknown. I kind of knew I had a bit of a trampoline net there for me.
I mean, that's really nice as well. And that's often the bit that people don't tell you is that there's a connection they've got where they can use them for support to sort of get themselves back on their feet. And yeah, I think I've always struggled with that whole thing of like, obviously very business and entrepreneurial people going, do you know what? Just go in and quit and see and make it work. And it's like, that's a huge call. And while I'm in a position, still live with my parents, still very lucky that I've not got a lot of commitments.
Yeah.
Still a big call, very big call, no matter which time in your life you make it.
It is. And I think because even now, me with the new business that I'm in that's away from all of that, like I 100% saw that, like, and it was definitely felt like a much scarier, bigger leap, because you realize I don't have that net. I don't have connections in this field. I'm building up my reputation again. And it's only now, kind of like a couple of years in, it's been a really interesting thing to kind of notice, actually, like the last time I was home, that like good friends of mine and people from kind of like my previous life and my corporate life actually messaging me and asking me questions about health and gut health and anxiety and burnout. Because I think people knew that I went through it, but for them to see you then as like this expert, it takes a little while. So it's definitely way harder making that leap. And I totally agree, because you see the success stories on Instagram and social media, and it's like, oh, quit, take the leap and the universe will reward you. And it doesn't talk about all the hard work and like the in-between stages of that.
Yeah. 100%, and that leads to my next question quite nicely. Well, I think you've pretty much answered it, which is your opinion on hustle culture. We've just touched on it there, of like there's a lot on social media of like, oh, just quit your job, like just have something on the side, always be working on the side. You don't want to be in the corporate world and be someone else's employee. What's your view on that? Obviously you've gone through it, worked in the corporate world, now working for yourself. What's your view on hustle culture?
I think inherently it's pretty toxic. Depending on who you talk to, obviously there's other people who kind of position it and talk to it in different, more positive ways, but it glorifies burnout, in my opinion. And it's going to be worth it. And do not get me wrong, it's something, even with the new business now, that I'm definitely still finding ways to kind of have a better work-life balance and get rid of some of the limiting beliefs that I held, that I have to burn out and like work myself to the bone to be a success, because two things can kind of be true at once. I think it takes a lot of hard work, but also like I never, ever want to get to the stage where I was at before, and I never want to compromise my health. And I think we kind of see a lot of BS online. I don't think it's the whole truth. And I think it can be very frustrating for people who are working very hard. And also not everybody wants to be their own boss. And I think it's perfectly fine to work for another company and have that stability. And one other thing that I wanted to say as well, which I kind of think is a bit of a lie as well, is if you do something you'll love, you'll never work another day in your life. Yes, I love doing what I do, and it gives me so much joy in comparison to what I was doing before, but also it brought a lot of stress with it. And you do wear a ton of different titles and hats that I think you go into it and I'm like, yes, I'm so good at this. I want to coach people. I know exactly what I'm doing and love that side of things. But obviously at the beginning, unless you've got a cash injection from a rich relative or something, you're on your own. So you're doing the sales side of it, you're doing the social media, you're doing the customer experience, like things that you might not necessarily like, that take a lot of time, that take a lot of headspace. So I just wanted to touch on that as well, because I think that it can be easy to look at like our lives and think, oh, you've got much more freedom in what you do, you love what you do, it must be easy. And I don't think that's the case.
No, and I think there's a lot of no matter what your job is, whether it's something that you've created or not, there's always going to be elements of the job that you hate, and there's always going to be people will have this misconception that you do something you love, and then you wake up every day and go, oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest, I'm sat here with Katie at 7:13 in the morning on a Wednesday. I did not want to get out of bed this morning, but I wanted to have this conversation. So it's a very double-edged sword of yes, once we get into what we're doing and get into the flow, great, but we still have that procrastination, the not 100%. Wanting to do it, or this specific task we're putting on because I hate doing my taxes because it's confusing. It's never everyone seems to think you went, oh yeah, my life's great. No, there's a lot of stress that comes with it. Like, and also I think as well, I've been very lucky that both my parents are self-employed. So I've grown up in that space. So I've seen the good, the bad and the ugly.
That's awesome. So and it's kind of a bit more normalized.
I know what's coming. Yeah. And it's that whole thing of, you know what's coming and you know the realistic side of it. Because as I say, social media kind of shows you the very pretty, oh, you can do this, you can go here, you can have matcha tea whenever you want. Like that's not the realistic thing most of the time. Like I love the thing that people think that people work in social media, we're just out posting pictures all day when actually 95% of our time is sat behind a desk.
100%. Yeah, totally agree.
It's mad, but yeah, I'm completely with you. I think there's definitely a place for hustle culture because there's an element of like, to get where you want to go, if you want to do your own thing, you need to put the hours in.
Agree.
100%. But there is also, remember that you are in charge, and if you need a day, take the day.
I think that's the thing, and I think it's also just remembering that, especially if you are, because I think you can be a bit more flexible when you work for yourself. That is a huge positive. Obviously, like on a day where I'm not feeling as great, I'm like, okay, like unless it's something that I've committed to like this, which obviously I wouldn't just cancel on you. But if it's something that I've just scheduled in my diary as like a piece of work or content or something that I'm going to create, if I'm not feeling particularly great that morning, I can push it back a bit. Whereas I know you don't really get the luxury of that when you work for another company. But I think another really important note is just to remember that you are kind of, although I'm sure you're very important in your role, it's kind of remembering that you're like, we're all kind of a cog in a wheel wherever we are, and that if you get ill, they will just replace you. So I remember getting so stressed and working myself up so much about potentially upsetting someone or not getting something done in time. I would like work myself to the bone on it and just think, now I've stepped back from it. I'm like, why did I do that? Because you are just, for a big business, it's normally about the bottom line. I've worked for smaller businesses, they've got a lot better culture. But yeah, it's kind of your health is way too important to sacrifice for that.
100%. And I think as well, there's that realization, particularly for the younger generation, speaking from someone with a disability, like the element of being in that situation and being earlier in your career is a very difficult situation to be in because you haven't got the backing of the experience. Whereas if you have to leave a role because it's not working for you, yes, it's going to take you some time and you're going to go through some hardship. But the transition's a little bit easier because you've got the experience behind you.
Yes.
And I think that's the other thing. And although I don't fully buy into the hustle culture thing, it is bringing it back to that whole thing of remembering in a corporate context of working for another company, you're building someone else's dream rather than your own. Not saying that you have to build your own. Your dream might be to have a happy family, live with 2 dogs, and that's perfectly fine and perfectly achievable. But also remembering that the corporate world doesn't really give a shit in real context. And I think that is, having said that, I think that is getting better.
Yeah.
I think slowly you're seeing companies be more aware of it.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, particularly because it's one of the main reasons I didn't choose to work up in London when I left school, wanted to be in marketing, everyone's like, go work in London. There was the 2 things that were going on in my head. 1, trains and wheelchairs don't go together. And 2, I just didn't buy into the whole not leaving the office till 9 p.m.
No.
That was never going to be me. And that sounds like, really lazy. And it's funny now. I sit and think I spend many hours sat here till like 9, but then I'm like, that's my own stupid choice.
Yeah. You're like, I don't have to. And it's knowing that you're working for you. And I think I very much I completely agree. It is much harder when you're at the beginning of your career. And I just kind of got stuck in this cycle of it will get better. It will get better. Like especially in PR, there are so many different levels. There are like 10 before you get to account director. And I'd worked my way up to account director. And I was like, this hasn't got any better. Like I was almost promised. It was like the American dream, right? Like you were promised kind of this dream and things would be way less stressful. You'd have this whole team underneath you and like you'd have so much more time. And I didn't. I just felt like I was now, because I was at a certain level, I was fighting these fires that I didn't even know about before as well. So that almost feeds into a little bit as well of like, I was just on this, I'd kind of gone from school, university, internship, job, work my way up. And I remember when one of my friends like initially suggested, like she said that she was going to do a working holiday visa in Australia for a year. And I was like, there's no way I could do that. Like, it didn't even just get past this part of my brain. No, I was like, no, like, working my way out.
Fast forward.
Yeah. And I was like, that would completely, like, disrupt my plans and my career. And I'd actually, that was at the same time that the doctor had said to me, you need to change up your lifestyle. You need to change up your career. But I was kind of still pretty tied to it at the time. And also it was like that, well, if I'm not going to do that, what am I going to do? And the worry of like, I've built up 8 years in this. What am I going to do? Like, who am I without PR?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I went on a holiday with this friend to Bali. And she was then going on to travel a little bit more and then doing her year in Australia. And everyone that I met when I was there, because obviously when you're kind of this side of the world and in Asia, there are a lot of people who are traveling, and they were like, where are you going next? Like, where are you going next? And I was like, home, back to London. No, so I kind of got these string of questions of, like, have you got a partner? And I was like, no. And they were like, do you love London? And I was like, I'm a bit over it, actually. I'd been there 4 years, and I was just like, I need something different. And they were like, like, do you really love your job? And I was like, no. And it was just this realization. I was like, what am I doing? And I knew that I had like a year left, I think, at the time, to file for my working holiday visa, because it had to be before you were 30. I think I was around 28 at the time. And I just filed for it there and then, because I was like, otherwise I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to talk myself out of it. And that kind of has led me to where I am. I met my partner, then kind of COVID happened. He's Canadian. So we've kind of been going back and forth in between England and Canada, and sometimes Bali, which is where I am at the moment, but just completely changed my life trajectory. And because I wasn't tied to a career, and I was more open by the time COVID came around, that's when I started studying online. I got certified as a holistic health coach, and it kind of led me to where I am today.
It's really interesting, because like, I often had the same thought of like, what's tied me to England. I think there's an element of me of like, with the disability, there's the support side of it.
Yes.
But then there's another side of me that I spent a lot of time when I was younger in Spain. So Spain has definitely an element of like nostalgia for me, and like I love the Spanish way of living. I'm a big fan of siesta, love that, all a big fan of that. And also just everything's relaxed. Like, I think the UK just needs to chill out.
It does.
It's particularly, I think southern UK needs to chill out. Whenever like, my partner's from the Midlands and Northerners, they're so much more mellow. They're like, yeah, whatever, it's cool. Because even in Australia, so I had this kind of idea that I was going to work in a coffee shop on the beach in Australia, and then I definitely went to the wrong part of Australia, because I went to Melbourne, which was great, amazing, highly recommend, but not many beaches and not many coffee shops on the beach, and they take their coffee super seriously, like they have like degrees in coffee. So me, this like account director in PR in London, couldn't get a job in a coffee shop, so I actually ended up working in PR in Australia, which I promised everyone I wouldn't do, and my family were like, what are you doing? But the culture it actually made me like PR again, and it really made me think, okay, it's our approach to it, and it's kind of like the general, I don't think it's necessary. PR is a very stressful, high-paced job, but it wasn't in Australia. It's kind of who you're working with and how people approach it, which I found really interesting. 100%. I mean, my cousin moved to Australia, and she's been out there years now. Started in recruitment. No, she still is in recruitment, but she says the same. Recruitment here was horrible, or hated it. Went traveling, moved to Australia, and then loves it now. She even runs a pod.
Amazing.
So it's mad as well, the different cultures. But I think that's something to be said. Something that the UK can learn. We need to just chill. Chill out a little bit. it's not that deep. No one died, as my dad constantly
Exactly.
says.
I remember like I had some really great people that I worked with in London and in the UK, by the way. It was more just kind of the model. But I remember some of my bosses saying to me, like, it's PR, it's not ER, like, chill out. So yeah, completely agree with that sentiment.
Although coming back around to a bit more about you, so can you tell us a bit more about the glow getter method and like what's actually involved in that?
Yes, of course. So it originally stemmed from when I was originally ill and kind of in the depths of things. Like things got particularly bad actually when I got back from Australia. I'd gone to Australia. I was working, I was feeling better. I kind of was dipping my toe in a lot of holistic methods. I did a lot more testing over there and kind of looking into the gut microbiome and things kind of outside of IBS, or like the reasons for IBS instead of it's just IBS, take a pill. And I was starting to see benefits. But when I landed back home, 2020, I landed in actually at 6 a.m. on my 30th birthday by myself to lockdown. And my boyfriend had gone back to Canada. We were apart for like 7 months. The world kind of had just stood still. Obviously, I'd gone back and was staying with my parents, but they were living in Norfolk because they kind of decided to like semi-retire out in Norfolk. So that wasn't where I was from either. So my whole world was kind of just a bit upside down. And where I thought I'd kind of made like real progress in getting better, it was when I took my worst dip that summer. And symptoms and everything just got way worse. So that is when I decided I remember lying in bed and I'd been told by this point that they thought that I had chronic fatigue. And I couldn't look at screens. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't do anything. I remember just laying in bed, feeling like I had like weights on my limbs, like to get up just felt like a big struggle. Like, so even worse than that time, like with the hairbrush and the back of the knees and things. And I remember just staring at my ceiling and just thinking like, this can't be it. I feel like I'm like in my 80s. This is insane. I did a little bit of research and found the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York. And luckily they were online, and it's nutrition, but holistic health and kind of everything that goes into that. And the reason that I studied there initially wasn't to change my job, to get certified or anything. I just wanted to get better. And anyway, after 6 months, I was just like a completely different person. I'd made huge strides. I felt so much better. And that was when I got really mad, actually. I got angry that people weren't being told this, and that so many young women in particular with gut issues were just being told that they had IBS, given a tablet and just kind of told to get on with it. And I was like, you can heal yourself, and we're just not being told it. So anyway, so I decided instead of getting mad, I would do something about it. And that's how the Glow Getter method came about. I'd already had like an Instagram account called Glow Getter. And it was initially started for like a bit of an outlet, like venting, like when I wasn't feeling very well. And then I found that there was so many people that were chronically ill feeling the same. So that was a really good support at the time. But the name kind of came from, I just felt like I'd lost my KT spark, and I wanted to get it back. And to me, when you're healthy and happy, you literally glow from the inside out. So that's where kind of the Glow name came from. And because of the whole like burnout history, Glow Getter. So the Glow Getter method is essentially, it's a 3-month, 12-week plan to get you back to feeling like you. Although it's very much kind of rooted in gut health. The first step that we do before anything, which really feeds into everything that we've been talking about, and is why a lot of people don't get better because they just focus on nutrition, is working on your nervous system and regulating your nervous system, working on your stresses, kind of figuring out what's going on there and like any blockers before we then work on your gut. Because I see it with so many people. I was the same. You put everything into nutrition and trying to find the perfect diet and the perfect supplement. I've studied 135 different nutrition theories now. There is no perfect diet. And sorry, this is a very long answer, but I've got one more bit, I promise.
No, that's fine. I love it.
But take it back to Gina. But when you're in the stress response, you physically cannot be in the rest and digest response. So it's like a light switch. So when you're stressed, you cannot digest your food. Our makeup still goes back to our ancestors. When we're stressed, it might literally just be a lot of us are chronically living in an elevated stress response now. We kind of don't turn it off. But our body still thinks, it doesn't realize that it's a stressful email from our boss or a horrible text from our ex-boyfriend. It thinks that we're running from a tiger. So it takes everything to your brain and to your limbs, and it takes away from that burger that you've just eaten or that salad that you've just eaten. It's not paramount to digest that right now because it thinks you're running from a tiger. So what happens is it either flushes it out, and that's when you get diarrhea, or you just don't get any of the digestive enzymes, pancreatic juices, etc., to help break it down, and then it just sits there and it essentially just rots. So that's when you get the bloating, the pain, etc. And when that happens time and time again, you're just creating more and more inflammation, which can lead to leaky gut, a ton of other things. But yeah, and the reason that it's so connected to anxiety and kind of low moods and sometimes depression and things like that is because 90% of your serotonin is in your gut as well. So that's your happy hormone. So it's all so connected.
That's actually mind-blowing. The worst thing is it makes so much sense.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it does, doesn't it? When you hear it, you're like, I didn't know. Why did you tell me this before?
Yeah, it's like, of course you're not going to, of course your body's going to go, oh no, we're not going to focus on this because we got to run from the target. Because if you listen to any podcast where they talk about like the way our brains are wired, we're still wired in the way of like, we're still running from tigers, in which case I would be screwed. However, it is mad. I'll be faster till mud arrives. Till we get through any mud, then we got a problem. But no, it's mad how it all links together and how no one, like you say, no one's connected the dots. Like, or no one, I hadn't become aware of that. There's a linkage. Like I've listened to a lot of content and stuff around gut health and stuff like that, but they've never made the link of like stress plus this equals this. It's mad.
I think it's the way that our healthcare system in the UK works as well, is that everyone is so silo, like, and you have to wait weeks at a time. So people just kind of end up giving up, especially when you're given what you think is a diagnosis. You're like, okay, that's it. But you'll go and see like a gastroenterologist, you'll go and see a dietitian. You then might be eventually recommended I was recommended for CBT, but nobody connects the dots, and nobody kind of, other than holistic practitioners like myself or functional medicine doctors who kind of look at the body and the mind as a whole and are like, hold on, what's going on here? Because otherwise you end up just this hamster on this wheel, trying so hard, doing all the things that you see on TikTok and Instagram. And you're like, I'm doing all the things, I'm eating the perfect diet. Why isn't it working? And that is honestly 99% of the time with the clients that I work with, because I tend to work with people who've had chronic issues for a while and feel like they've tried everything. That is the missing piece. And we need to regulate your nervous system, make your body feel safe again before we can then build on those things. So I relate to those as like the foundations and getting your foundations really strong. Whereas a lot of us are much more interested in working on, like the extension and the conservatory, like the prettier pieces with the supplements and the biohacking, but none of that matters unless you've kind of got this piece down, because you're literally not absorbing your food. So I tell my clients, I'm like, you might as well be eating at McDonald's because it's not making a difference right now. You're not digesting.
I think the hardest thing is like a lot of people, when it comes from the frustration, I think of like, we've spoken a bit about Gina. I think it's just that whole thing, you get to a point where like you know that the process is going to be longer, but you just want a quick win just for that momentary relief. And I think that's the tricky thing of like, I fully understand that, because then you just want to break.
To that.
And it's how would you, like, what's your first piece of advice when it comes to helping someone gut health? You briefly touched on it there of like working on how you're feeling, the central nervous system, making sure that's regulated before tackling the actual dietary issues.
Yeah.
But in terms of like first steps, maybe a quick win, if there is a quick win, there may not be. Is there anything that you could recommend?
Yes. So I would say we almost bring it back to basics to start. So we look at what's going on and kind of what's causing the stresses and things like that and your goals, etc. But also so many people, because they are feeling so rubbish and trying to fit so much into their schedule to kind of tick off all these things to feel better, they've often come really far away from the basics that could be making them feel better. So it's just in terms of helping the body to feel safe, it can literally be as simple as starting to build a bit of a routine. So I always highly suggest, I say, like bookending your day with some like mindful me time. So that whether that's 5 minutes, whether that's an hour, whatever you can spare. I know some people are busier than others. Some people have children and they're like, I don't have time in the morning. I'm like, please, just 5 minutes, just take it for yourself. And I like to, you can start wherever, but in an ideal world, we tick off mind, body, soul. And it can be a couple of minutes on each. And that can look like, I make sure it's highly personalized. So I kind of give clients like a pick and mix toolbox to choose from. And because it's whatever works for you. Some people love meditation. Some people hate it. Some people like journaling. Some people like going for a walk. Some people like dancing to their favorite song in the morning. I would say what's really key for any of that to kind of work is not looking at your phone first thing in the morning. I know it's so hard, but once you break the habit, because as soon as you look at your phone, those stresses are activated and everybody else's. You're so often, I think a few years ago when I realized it, I was like, I never give myself any time. It's emails, messages, this, that, and your mind never gets a break. So highly recommend that in the morning, just taking some kind of downtime for you. That can literally be as simple as getting out on a walk. You can also help reset your circadian rhythm in the morning if you get some sun in your eyes. I know that's not been as likely in the UK at the moment, but the sun doesn't even have to be out. It just kind of has to be daylight within the first hour. That essentially helps to reset your circadian rhythm. And these are all things that are helping your body feel safe. The more you can kind of get your body into a routine, the more it kind of lets down the defenses and is like, okay, we're starting to get in a safe space, and it begins to kind of trust you again. But so the circadian rhythm, basically, if you start waking up at the same time every day, this might help you actually, Charlie. You will, and you get some sunlight within an hour. You basically wake up a lot more naturally because it spikes your cortisol at the same time every morning. So instead of kind of needing an alarm and waking up to that horrible sound, you just wake up kind of more naturally. And also it spikes your melatonin before bedtime. So it kind of naturally helps you to feel sleepy, because I know a lot of people, old self included, I was like in this tired and wired state. Like I'd feel permanently exhausted, and it would come to bedtime and it would be like zing, a million things going around my head. So that really helps with that as well. So it's kind of two really simple things you could do of a morning to help your body kind of start regulating again.
Definitely. And I think definitely guilty of that. I had to implement, I think about 2 years ago now, no caffeine after 3.
Yes.
If I had caffeine after 3, it was like game over. You're going to be laying there with the next big business idea in your head at 11 p.m. And you're like, oh, just stop. Please stop.
Yeah. Why couldn't this come earlier during my brainstorm?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Why couldn't this come earlier when my brain was actually meant to be working? Now I'm just laying here going, great.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think as well, a lot of people I know that suffer with anxiety, and that links with their gut health, also struggle with, you say about taking the time for themselves. They then have this horrible complex of, then they feel guilty for taking the time for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's a spiral have you seen that with clients?
Yes, definitely. Like all kind of seem to be. So where I was saying earlier about like the type A, perfectionist, like people pleaser, every single one of my clients so far has ticked all of those boxes. So it feels very uncomfortable to begin with for the focus to kind of be on you instead of someone else. And to me, to begin with, and it is not, I just want to kind of underline that like it felt almost a bit selfish. And I knew I had all these other things to be doing, but how I try and help clients to see it is like, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
filling your own cup. Like, you've got nothing to pour with. Like, and I just become a really bad friend. Because I just got to the point where when I did burn out, I wasn't replying to messages. I didn't want to be doing anything, even when I was at places physically, like I was disassociating. And it's kind of reminding yourself, you're not the best version of you right now. You'll be a better friend, a better partner, a better daughter, a better son, whatever it is, if you can kind of fill your own cup first. So I talk about filling your own cup, and I also talk about, where we were talking about mindful me moments in the morning, I call that emptying your stress bucket. So anything those two kind of go nicely together, and everyone in all walks of life kind of has different sizes and shapes of their stress bucket. I know personally, my boyfriend Josh has this massive stress bucket, I think, because he never really seems to get stressed. Whereas, especially when I was really ill, it felt like I was like this close to the surface every time. It could be the tiniest thing. I would fly off the handle. I would cry. I would get upset. And I'd be like, it's not that deep, as you would say. Like, why? Like, what's wrong with me? And it's because I wasn't emptying that stress bucket. So that's really key as well. So filling your own cup at the same time as emptying that stress bucket, so you can become more resilient to stress, because stress isn't something that ever goes away. It's something that we've got to deal with daily, unfortunately. So it's just, I make sure that I give my clients methods and tools to be able to deal with it, and not just in the moment. Like, we want something that's preventative and kind of daily as well, and that helps with that.
Love that. One thing I did want to ask, and this isn't, this one just popped into my head, is oftentimes when people think of, like, I've worked with both Western medicine, holistic medicine, can see the benefits of both. However, a lot of people view holistic medicine as witchy woo. What the hell are they waffling on about?
Yeah.
So what would you say to that? Because I think you've been through both sides of it. You've had a negative experience with Western medicine, moved to holistic and had a very positive experience. But then for those that don't know about holistic medicine, it's like, it's almost like, I think everyone thinks of like, they're going to mash up these leaves and feed them to me. It's like, no, that's not how that works.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think it is, especially, it's really interesting because I work online. I work with clients kind of all over the world, and it's really interesting to see different people's opinions and approaches. And I do find the UK market has almost been like the toughest to crack. And I think it is because of that, partly, and also probably because we've had free healthcare, right? So we're not used to paying for any kind of healthcare, which is silly because it's the most important thing. And once you've got that right, you can kind of go on, live your best life. So I would say, I think there is definitely there's definitely room for both. Where what I love is actually functional medicine. So it does exist in the UK, but it's a lot more prevalent in the US and Australia. And it's basically where these are kind of normal Western doctors have realized that actually, instead of like just handing out pills and like, I've watched so many lectures of doctors who just felt like they were like pill poppers, like drug dealers, because that's what they were doing. They weren't actually able to help their patients, and it was really affecting them as well, because they were like, we're not actually helping them get better, we're just stopping them get any worse. And then sometimes they get a ton more symptoms from the medication that they're taking. So they've then gone on and studied even more, and they're now functional medicine doctors. So I would say the difference between the two is that Western doctors are kind of interested in the what. They're great, by the way, I want to say that, and especially for medical emergencies, awesome. But it's like, if you're dealing with a chronic condition, they haven't got the time, and they haven't always got the knowledge, and they're kind of just specialized in their area. Whereas functional medicine doctors, holistic healthcare practitioners, we're interested in the why. So kind of getting to the root cause. We're like, okay, whereas your Western doctor might be like, it's IBS, we're like, okay, what's causing it? Because that's not actually a diagnosis. There's a reason behind it. It's almost, I always give the analogy of, if you had a pin in your foot, would you put a plaster over it and keep walking on it, or would you want to take the pin out? And we take the pin out. So we work with blood tests, it's all completely science backed, especially me with my mind. Like, I need to know that there's science behind it. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And there can be people on social media who don't give it the best name, or like these influencers who don't really know what they're talking about. But you need to find the good eggs who do. And we Definitely. Bring it all together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that as well, having used it, like I've got my osteopath, he's all for holistic health. Don't get him started on painkillers. He goes off on one. And then his mum's holistic horoscope. She works with that, and it does work. That's the thing. It does work, and I think, as you say, it's bringing that awareness to say there is space for both. Like, I definitely believe in both. Yeah. And I think there's too much of this, like, oh, you got to be one camp or the other. Like, why do we always fall into that? We always fall, no matter what part of life you look at, there's always like, oh, you've got to be left wing, right wing, you got to be this, you got to be that. It's
everything has to have a label. And I think that's what I love about holistic healthcare and being a holistic health coach. Is like one of our biggest kind of foundational words that we use is bio-individuality. And it's basically, the idea is that no one person is the same, and like another person's food, one person's food is like another person's poison. Like, I'm sure you've seen all over the internet at the moment, especially, it definitely falls into what you were just saying. It's like the carnivore diet, and then it's the plant-based diet, and it's like, guys, like you don't have to choose a side. And really, in my opinion, what's bringing these both together is that you're not eating as much shit, you're not eating as much processed food, you're eating more whole foods. And I don't think people should be shamed for their choices or made to kind of sit in one category. Health is really bio-individual. It depends on your upbringing. It depends what traumas you've had, like what genetics you've kind of got. We say that genetics kind of load the gun and your environment pulls the trigger. So it's kind of very much looking at what's going on in your world every day, and seeing nutrition is a huge part, but what else are you consuming that's kind of leading to your health issues as well?
That brings you quite nicely onto one of my other questions, which was, have you seen anything like with clients of like a common thing? Like the thread that I'm seeing, but I think it's because that's the one I've got experience with, is a lot of it comes from anxiety. Is that the common thread that you see with clients, or is there another common thread that you see?
So I would say, honestly, it's kind of it's more the type of person in the kind of the type A overachiever, people pleaser, because that kind of leads to, because some people, I feel like their anxiety tends to get a lot worse with like in tandem with their gut issues. I think it's something that's definitely probably was there a bit to begin with, and then it kind of explodes and gets worse, and then they just kind of keep each other going. But it's usually the not putting yourself first, the kind of the lack of boundaries, and just kind of pushing yourself too hard.
And that it's really interesting because, as I say, that all links together.
Yeah,
it all comes from, like, I think that all, if you're looking at a wide lens, a load of people would stuff all of those symptoms under anxiety, when actually there's a lot more there.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's getting to the root of anxiety, because anxiety is not something that necessarily ever goes away, but it's something like mine is way, way better, and like kind of gone from here to like here, because I've taken away a lot of of the root causes. That it can be, we call it like the ball of wool theory, when you're just kind of staring at this like mess of wool and you're like, how did I get here? And you kind of just start pulling away at it. But once you start to do that, things start to become a bit clearer, and you can kind of see the grass from the weeds.
It's a hard place to get to, and I think as well, it's that, like I say, I think in Western society, particularly UK, and I'd imagine, to be honest, Australia and the States being quite similar, is we all want rapid. None of us want to take the time. All of us want it yesterday.
No,
and I fall into that. I'm like, no, I want it now. I don't want it tomorrow. I don't want it in 6 years' time. I want it now.
I think we all do. And I think like today's society has kind of fed into that, because everything is freaking instant. You can get everything next day delivery. Sometimes you can get it this day delivery. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Coming on to some, we briefly touched on obviously that it's all to do with what's going on with you in your life, and rather than the certain foods. Are there any certain foods that you would advise clients to sort of steer away from, stay away from, or is there ones that you think you definitely consume this? You need to consume
so
this.
I would say, like, first port of call, kind of checking on your stress. But when we're looking at food, there tends to be a few foods. So I always like to say that kind of I help clients make healthy swaps to begin with. So sugar is a big one, especially if you are struggling with gut issues and anxiety. You can go on the blood sugar roller coaster, which just spikes your anxiety. So if you're feeling quite anxious anyway, and then you tend to get like energy drops and energy slumps, kind of mid-morning, mid-afternoon, you're likely on this blood sugar roller coaster. So you kind of want to, I'm not demonizing sugar. Sugar definitely has its place. It's just balancing how you eat it. So kind of eating in a more blood sugar balanced way. So you're not just eating like naked carbs and naked sugar by itself. You want to be putting in some healthy fats and some protein and fiber with that. Or kind of instead of just having sugar on an empty stomach, having it as like a dessert. So a lot of this is actually just going back to like how our grandma and granddads like would have eaten. Like, they knew what they were doing and we messed with it. It's kind of like having dessert, and it's switching over to kind of healthier sugars that aren't going to aggravate your gut and cause as much inflammation. So instead of kind of like your table sugar, switching over to honey, a good quality maple syrup, dates, kind of natural sugars that they gel with your body better. And then in general, if you are like kind of in the initial stages of kind of trying to fix your gut and your microbiome, gluten and dairy are two biggies, which if you remove them for a little while usually help. But this might be where you can't, I don't like to give this advice just randomly, because obviously if you're not doing the other work, you might not necessarily see the results, but it always tends to help. It just brings the inflammation down. But that's what I was going to say, and I forgot earlier when we were talking. When we were talking about the quick fix, what a lot of people don't like is that the work that you have to do here is very much rooted in behavior change, which is freaking hard. Atomic Habits is a really good book for people to read if they haven't, about behavior change. But because if you can work with me for 3 months, feel awesome, feel the best that you ever had, but if you go back to exactly the same things that you were doing before, you're going to find yourself in that same spot again.
It's the same as gym, guys. It's a lifestyle thing. You can't just all of a sudden,
unfortunately,
go, I'm going to do it for 12 weeks. I'm going to look great. Yeah. And then I'm going to go on an all-inclusive holiday and start again. It's interesting. I mean, I think gluten's one of the ones that's tricky. I think a lot of like Gina's trying a lot of stuff without gluten, and I'm one of the people. I'll eat anything, and I'm very lucky that I don't face too many gut issues. But I must admit, some of the gluten stuff, it's like just turns to mush, and it's
And I have to say, so I have to caveat with the kind of the if you are cutting gluten, like the gluten-free products are some of the worst. They're highly processed, they're full of sugar. So I would say it's kind of moving towards, so if we were going to talk about something that you should include in foods, it would be whole foods as much as you can. So kind of cooking more at home and kind of using real ingredients, because sometimes you can look at the back of things, and even something that might be, even if it's in Whole Foods, double check, because the marketing is sneaky and clever, and you kind of just assume that it's healthy because they're telling you on the front that it is, and sometimes they can still have a huge label full of crap. So kind of getting back to a more whole foods based diet where you're kind of cooking for yourself, and if you don't understand what an ingredient is, you shouldn't be eating it.
What's your opinion on like things like, there's a lot of hype around kombucha and things like that? Is there a place for that? I'm still on the fence with it. I'm like, does it do anything? I don't know.
So I think you have to be, depending on where you are, like with your gut health and your gut healing journey, like to begin with, it can really aggravate things, just like probiotics can be you're throwing money down the drain to start with, because you need to address kind of the root causes, calm down the inflammation, etc., before you introduce that. So if you are taking a probiotic and it's not working, that might be why. There might be a few other steps you're kind of missing first. And that's the same with things like kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. They're really good for your good gut bugs, but if you've kind of got a bit of a hot mess in there, it can aggravate things to begin with. And also because it is something that's become quite trendy, it really annoys me because obviously marketing people just jump on the bandwagon. And actually there are now some kombuchas that just aren't even that good for you. They're full of sugar. One in the UK that I would recommend is Remedy kombucha because it actually has 0 sugar by the end of it. And yeah, that tastes nice. But yeah, as I say, at the beginning of your gut healing journey, it might aggravate things a little bit more. But towards the end, when you're kind of back to building up your microbiome again, it can be a good thing. But like anything, like in like small quantities, just because it's good for you, don't go drink 8. Like start with half a glass, see how you are.
Actually, another one I wanted to ask, and I'm a bit of a fanboy for it. And if you don't know, don't worry. Yeah. But like, have you played with anything like CBD? Has there been any place for that in the work that you do?
So not in my work yet, but personally, yes. So it was in 2020 when I was at kind of like my worst, lowest point. I was trying the drops under the tongue. They tasted so gross, the ones that I had. And the first time I kind of seemed to have a weird reaction in my gut actually. But then I carried on with it and it seemed to get a bit better. And then, there's the CBD drinks and stuff now. So I think it's Trip was the brand. I had a few of them when I was back. Interesting to see where that goes. And I'm really interested in the current research at the moment on like microdosing mushrooms for anxiety.
Oh, I'm all over that. Yeah, I really want to see where that goes. Yeah, because it's been on my radar for years, but it seems to people have stopped talking about it. I'm like, what is going on with that? Are we still testing that?
Yeah, so it's something that I'm really keen to see kind of what happens with, and a few like influencers and stuff that I follow. I mean, they're always doing everything in America first, right? I've been trialing things, but mushrooms in general are so powerful. Like I take adaptogenic mushrooms, and for me, it's like a natural. It's like my coffee, essentially. I have like a mix of 6, lion's mane, cordyceps,
what are they?
A couple of others, and really good for focus, your immune system. Obviously, they all have different benefits, but yeah, I love those.
Yeah. I mean, I've never even thought that there would be different kinds of mushrooms. I think my issue is I struggle with the texture of mushrooms, always have.
So this is just a powder. It's just a drink. So you don't need to deal with the texture. I know the texture is a bit.
Lastly, how do you manage? Like, you're now self-employed. You now run your own business. As we've said, the stresses that come with that. How do you now balance that with obviously your experience with burnout before working in corporate London? You can very easily end up in a similar position running your own organization or own little business. So how do you make sure, as you've touched on, I think you bookmark each part of your day, but how do you make sure you don't slip back in?
Yeah. So it's a good question because I definitely don't think it's something that I've got 100% down. And I don't know if anybody kind of ever will, because obviously there's different seasons of life. I definitely realized that over the last 6 months that I was I was nowhere near kind of like approaching burnout, but I'm very much more in tune with my body now. And kind of that's how I work with clients as well, is kind of once you kind of start feeling so good, it's really obvious. And once we're almost like little detectives and we kind of piece together all the clues and like put together a timeline of what's gone on. And once you're aware of that and what's caused that, it's much easier to look out for signs. But yeah, me and my boyfriend Josh were laughing about it the other day because he was like, you see, again, we were talking about social media and how it kind of like glorifies like working for yourself and like things just working out straight away when you take the leap. We were just laughing and this wasn't true. And he was just like, it's quite ironic that you literally fixed yourself, like you were feeling amazing, like you healed from burnout. He's like, and then you decided to start a business, like, and he was like, obviously it was great that you did. He was like, but do you ever think like, why did I do that? And I was like,
Yeah.
Sometimes, but yeah, so it's definitely, it's just things that keep me grounded, like little rituals throughout the day. So I definitely bookend my day with the morning, the evening. Do I do it every day? No, I'm human. Like there are some days that doesn't happen. I make sure that if there's days where I'm doing more, I'll bring in like some more meditation, some more breath work, things like that throughout the day. If I know I've got a busier week, I try and be more proactive instead of kind of fighting fires afterwards. But yeah, it's something that you never really know, as I'm sure you know, Charlie, you never really know what's coming your way, kind of what's coming up. So it's just trying to prepare myself kind of as best as possible and just be more flexible. Because I remember to begin with, like I'd write a plan for the day and the week and I'd feel like I had to stick to it 100%. And then it's like, okay, like I'm my own boss. Like this is the one good side of it. Like if you're not feeling as good one day, be a bit more flexible. But yeah, it's just kind of trying to stay really aware of where you're at and kind of where you're maybe doing too much and just bringing those kind of rituals in and practicing what I preach, really.
I think it's hard as well. Like you say, you have to almost be, when you run your own business, whether that be on the side or full time, you have to almost be ready for any opportunity that comes up.
Yeah.
Because especially in some of the circles, it's like you have to jump on it when it comes up. Otherwise, if you come back to it later, it won't be there.
Yeah.
And that's very tricky to marry up with trying to find a work-life balance of, I don't work after this time, or after this time I shut off. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to try and battle with.
It definitely is. That's a really interesting point, actually. And I'd say one thing that I would add to it is I try as best I can. It doesn't always happen. But I actually had like a business mentor like a year ago, as talking about social media and all things like that. And because, as I said, like I was like, I'm a coach, but like the whole rest of it and like running a business is kind of new to me. So I try and batch like projects and tasks where possible. So like I'll try and have all of my client days a couple of days a week. I'll try and have like content days. I'll try and have admin days. Obviously it doesn't always happen. But that's what I kind of try and aim for, just so that it's a little bit easier and it's not so stop, start. And you can kind of get in the flow a little bit more. And I find that definitely helps negate stress. Then you can have a random call. A client wants to switch a day. Life happens, but we can try.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, it's always the whole thing, and I think that's something I've realised recently, is like you can come up with the best systems in the world and work to them as best you can, but you need to stop beating yourself up if you don't constantly hit the marker.
Yes.
And it's something I go on about as a gym head, like people going and being like, oh, I've messed up here, I've not done this, and I'm like, life happens. Like, I'll be honest, this week I've not done half the cardio I should have.
Yeah.
But it just happens, you move on, and like, what's done is done, and just do better tomorrow. And I think that comes into the calorie game. Like, don't get me started up. Just touch on it. Like, I'm a big believer of don't focus on if you want to do calorie counting, don't focus on daily targets. Focus on weekly targets, if not monthly targets.
Yes.
Because otherwise you drive yourself nuts. If you eat an apple and go 80 calories over, Karen, you're not going to die. You're fine. It's okay.
It's so interesting, actually, because that's so true. And that is another big thing, which I can't believe that I forgot to talk about. But I think it's because it's something that I just talk about all the time. But something that is definitely feeds into people with gut issues, and me, definitely a work in progress, is the all or nothing mindset. And as you're saying, like about the Karen, it's kind of when you do one thing wrong, you're like, oh my God, or you just, I used to call it like the fuck it Friday, where especially when I was in like my depths of healing, I'd be doing everything. Nothing would be getting better. And on Friday, I'd just be like, fuck it, I'll eat whatever I want. So yeah, it's kind of trying to, instead of like having that all or nothing mindset, it's being, I like to say like, it's being curious, compassionate and consistent. Like they're much more important than things being perfect all the time.
Yeah, and as a visual representation, I think another thing to always remember is it's the tortoise and the hare. Like that still rings true today.
Yes.
Like, get there when you get there. It doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you're happy with how you got there, rather than you don't need to be there tomorrow. And I think that's something we could all learn from.
And I think it's reminded. Sorry, no, go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, I think it's reminding people as well, which sometimes I need to remind myself of. It's like, okay, well, has what you've been doing been working? It clearly hasn't. So like sometimes we need to make ourselves feel a little bit more uncomfortable.
It's like Einstein's law, isn't it? The whole thing of like, don't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result.
Exactly.
So you have got to try something different. And I think that's another thing of like, that can be quite scary. And but then also it can be quite freeing. And I think that's another thing to remember.
100%.
As well.
Once you're through the other side of it, I call it I think it's Dr. Joe Dispenza calls it the river of change. And again, like it's reminding yourself that you are working with this stress response, like your mind and body is very clever and it's trying to keep you safe. And to them, like, it's like, I think the phrase is like, it will take a familiar hell over like an unfamiliar heaven. Like, even if you're normal is shit, like it knows what to expect and it knows that you're alive. So your mind can be pesky. So it's just kind of pushing through it where you can.
It's been great chatting to you. I just want to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with? It can be absolutely anything. You can go from one extreme to the other. It's perfectly fine. It's just a bit of fun at the end of the episode.
Awesome. I like this question. So I'll obviously tie it into health and holistic health. And we kind of touched on it earlier, but I just don't agree with the having to have a label for everything. And I was going to bring up, it was funny that we ended up talking about it, was the carnivore diet, the plant-based diet, and just the going head to head and you having to be wrong because I'm right. Like, I just believe in balance and bio-individuality, and don't get caught up in the hype online.
Particularly, like, I think there's the carnivore one, there's the vegan wars, it's all going on. I'm like, guys, just do what's best for you. Yeah. It doesn't make a big difference. Yeah. Like, if it works for you, it works for you. But then also don't attack someone for doing what works for them.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think that's the thing. I think it's come so far. I think that's what annoys me, is that at the end of the day, it's supposed to be about health. And it's supposed to, like, so why are we kind of making people feel guilty and dragging them down? It's supposed to be something that brings you up and that like brings you joy. Yeah. So it does make me a bit mad when I see that, and I just scroll past it now. I'm like, no, not bringing this energy in.
Yeah, definitely. All for it. As a last thing, I always give guests the chance to talk, shout themselves out, say where people can find them, where people can follow them if they want to get in contact, if they want to go onto one of your programs. Where can people find you?
Of course. So you can find me at glowgetter_X on Instagram, which is where I am most of the time. And then also www.theglowgettermethod.com is where you can find out some more information about me as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on, Katie.
Thank you. It's been great. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.